writers say that the country was kept alive by memory and identity, culture, plays, music, and he himself was a playwright through writing literature. So it just goes to show you can wipe a country off of a map, but you can't erase the country altogether. So at Versailles, they bring it back. They bring the country, they brought Poland back. Some people who are not happy about that at all, Adolf Hitler, who called Poland the bastard son of the Versailles Treaty, and Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. They weren't happy about this. The Bolsheviks at that point, the Bolshevik Revolution had taken place October, November 1917. They were committed to spreading global communism. This goes back to, this is Marxism, Marxism-Leninism. Anyone know the final words in the Communist Manifesto? Workers of the world unite, right? Workers of the world unite. It says, throw off your chains, we have a world to win, a world to win. Karl Marx would say in 1850, it is our interest and our task to make the revolution permanent until the association of proletarians has progressed sufficiently far, not only in one country, but all the leading countries of the world. So the goal all along was to make communism global. Lenin said, now Vladimir Lenin was the first leader of the Bolsheviks in 1917 until his death in 1924. He said, we have always emphasized one cannot achieve such a task as socialist revolution in one country. Our victory will be a lasting victory only when our undertaking will conquer the whole world, because we launched it exclusively counting on world revolution. That was the goal. In March 1919, the Bolsheviks created something called the Communist International, known as the Comintern. So it was created that month, March 2nd through 6th, 1919. The Comintern would be global headquarters in Moscow to launch the goal of global communism. Lenin issued a statement that day. We live not only in a state, but a system of states, and the existence of the Soviet Republic side by side with the imperial state for an extended period is unthinkable. In the end, one or the other will conquer. Before this result, a series of horrible conflicts between the Soviet states and the bourgeois states is unavoidable. So as they put it, world revolution is the watchword of the day. So they create this Comintern, Soviet Communist International, 1919, and right away, even though Russia is still in a civil war between which two factions? Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. So the trade-off said, let's go. Let's start taking countries. They go into Bavaria, they go into Hungary, and they go into Poland. So Poland. Poland is the goal. Poland is the goal. So they go into Poland, the Red Army, while Karol Wojtyła is being born at that very moment. His father, Karol Wojtyła's father, was in the military. It's a rout. The Red Army comes in. Poland's not ready for this. It's been a new country at that point for just a few months. Through July, by early August, everything looked like it was going to be lost for the Poles. August 10th, the British government urged the people of Poland simply to surrender. Just forget about it. Pope Benedict the 15th, good. Pope Benedict the 15th on August 5th urges Catholics everywhere, all around the world, to pray for Poland, particularly through the intercession of the Blessed Mother, the patron of Poland. That, quote, she may turn away this new plague, Bolshevism, from Europe. So he issues that call, right, August 5th. George Weigel put it, as he put it, it was clear to most observers in Warsaw especially that the last desperate week of the resurrected Poland had arrived. To quote Lenin, right, we will strang the baby in its cradle. Looking very bleak, very bleak. One of the few who remained in Warsaw at the time was the papal nuncio, who was named Cardinal Ratti, R-A-T-T-I, the future Pope Pius XI. He says, I'm not leaving. Calls for perpetual adoration, takes monstrous, walks it through the streets of Warsaw. Shelling is coming in from the Bolsheviks, and this bold papal nuncio is walking around through the streets. Suddenly, on August 15th, the feast day of the Assumption of Mary, everything changes, total 180. To quote one historian, to leave Warsaw and break the Soviet advance, the counterattack had begun. General Pilsudski, expecting to discover a significant Soviet force at any moment, the charging Poles were surprised to find that the path suddenly mysteriously clear. As they advanced further, they found themselves suddenly unopposed. Pilsudski worried that the Soviets were setting a trap, that they were planning to encircle them with a superior force. Yet for almost 2 days, Polish forces raced onward, bringing aside a few Bolsheviks they encountered. Pilsudski could not believe his eyes. On the night of August 17th, Polish forces finally made contact with significant concentrations of Soviet troops. But the Soviets were taken unawares. The outcome for the Red Army was catastrophic. On the banks of the Vistula, now this is now known as the miracle at the Vistula in the Battle of Warsaw, some Poles claimed to see an image of the Black Madonna, Our Lady of Czestochowa, in the skies. In the days that followed, the seemingly invincible Red Army slouched back eastward from whence it had come. On hearing of what had happened on the banks of the Vistula, Lenin declared that his army had suffered an enormous defeat and promptly put on hold his plans for the bloody revolution. Poles returned to the shrine of Czestochowa. Candles were lit. John Paul II would later put it this way: "You know that I was born in 1820, in May, when the Bolsheviks marched toward Warsaw. And that's why since my birth I've carried the great debt toward those who died fighting against the aggressor and who won, giving their life to the country. Communism appeared very strong and dangerous. It seemed the communists would conquer Poland and would march to Western Europe. That they would conquer the world, starting with Poland, but it never happened. The miracle on the Vistula stopped Soviets." Now, that's 1820 that took place. Richard Pipes, the Soviet historian, the revolution in Poland, he quotes Vladimir Lenin, "The revolution in Poland on which we had counted did not take place. The warriors of peasants defended their class enemy. They let our brave red soldiers starve. They ambushed them, and they beat them." And that was it. So because of that, communism spreading to Eastern Europe, the Iron Curtain descending, would have to wait. It would have to wait until World War II, 1939, the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the Iron Curtain descending. And then at that point, with World War II, the Nazis would occupy Poland, and then the Soviets would occupy Poland from 1939 to 1989 for 50 years. 50 years, most of the life of Karol Wojtyła. They were occupied by totalitarian dictators during that period, awaiting a deliverer, if they could. Somebody from Poland, the Poles were hoping, who could change this, could end this battle against communism, who could help win the Cold War. All right, so that brings us to the second point. June 1979, trip to Poland. Back up a little bit to what Monsignor was saying a few minutes ago. October 1978, Karol Wojtyła is selected as Pope. So the 264th heir to the chair of St. Peter. And at that point, for 455 years, the Pope had been Italian, right? I mean, that's what it was. Right? What color is curtain? Right? It's black. Right? It's like the Pope is Italian. That's just the way it is, right? The Pope was always Italian. So after all that, for 55 years, Italian after Italian, there had never been a Slavic Pope ever. There had never been a Polish Pope ever. And yet the most religious country, the most Catholic country in the world and in Europe at that time was Poland. Probably more so even than Italy at that point in time. The communists had tried to squash religion everywhere they went, every country behind the Iron Curtain. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, East Germany, Albania. Who's the most famous little lady from Albania in the Catholic Church? Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa. Everywhere they went, but they couldn't stop the faith in Poland. So Poland remained overwhelmingly 90+% Roman Catholic. It drove the Bolsheviks. It drove the Soviets crazy. It had really bothered Lenin. It really bothered Stalin. Then it bothered Khrushchev and Brezhnev and all the way on up through. So it's the one place where they couldn't kill the faith. So all of a sudden, Conclave gets together. The previous Pope had been John Paul the first. How did he come up with that name? Previous two popes, right? John the 23rd, Paul the 6th. So you get a John Paul. He is pope for how long? 33 days. 33 days. So this new person comes in, Kirill Wojtyla. What is your name? John Paul II. So honoring John Paul I. But it was a stunning thing when this happened. People all over the place. Since I had these books, I've had Richard Pipes told a story. Meyer told me about meeting Richard Pipes. They're both Jewish. Meeting them at a Council of Foreign Relations event. And Herb Meyer said, hi, Dr. Pipes. Herb Meyer, yeah, good to see you. Did you hear what happened in Rome? No, what happened? Amazing news. Amazing news. They picked a Pole pope. I was like, really? Like, yeah, from Poland. Ronald Reagan, too. Just blown away that they did this. And this guy was shocked, too. He said, the Pope's supposed to be Italian. What are they doing, right? What are they doing? Do they know what they're doing? This is crazy. But they knew, or the Holy Spirit knew. Holy Spirit knew. They asked him, okay, where would you like to go for your first foreign trip? He said, where else? Poland. And the response by Pope's handlers was, well, the Kremlin, Soviets are not going to like that. I mean, just pick somewhere else first, like, maybe Ireland or, Nicaragua or something. I mean, Poland, isn't that kind of provocative? And he said, Poland, right? We're going to Poland. Immediately, so the Poles announced this. Leonid Brezhnev gets on the phone, calls the communist leader of Poland and says, what are you doing? You tell the Pope that he can't come. He's like, can I do that? Country, we're all Catholic. I can't say that. Well, I hear this Pope is an intelligent man. Tell him to come up with an excuse. Tell him to say that he's taken ill and he won't be able to come. I was thinking, well, that's June. It's like February, right? How am I going to do that? I'm going to be sick in 4 months. I can't come. And meanwhile, I was planning multiple trips eventually to Poland. But he told, Brezhnev told the consul, you better not regret this. Well, he regrets it. So the trip starts 9 days, like the number of a novena, June 2nd through 11th, 1979. And he gives his first talk in Warsaw, all right, in Victory Square in Warsaw. Like over 1 million people there. I mean, the priests in the audience, can you imagine giving communion, right, to like 1 million people? Lech Walesa would later say, great multiplication than the loaves and the fishes. All the people came up and got communion. And they told him, they said, don't say anything provocative, nothing political, just talk about Jesus. He gets up there, tells them all, be not afraid, as everybody gathers around on the outside, the perimeter, the guards with their AK-47s. Be not afraid. And then he makes this statement. He says, there can be no just Europe without the independence of Poland marked on the map. And that was just a bomb that went off in Moscow. That's the one thing that he was supposed to say. A few months after this, so the Soviets realized this is even worse than we thought. It's bad enough that it was a Polish pope to begin with. Now it's looking really bad. November 13th, 1979, and I quote this in A Pope and a President. The document has now been declassified. It's been released. John Kohler, the old Associated Press reporter, wrote Spies in the Vatican, found the document. There was a November 13th, 1979 meeting in Moscow, 12 members of the Soviet Central Committee. But Mikhail Gorbachev was there, too. And the whole focus of the meeting is, what do we do about this menace in Rome? Polish Pope. What do we do? What do we do about this guy? And the quotation, as you can see there, they call for all possible means to be used against this new Polish Pope, including measures beyond discreditation and character assassination. When these guys in a country that's killed tens of millions of people call for all available means, that's scary. The Italian Secret Service, SISDA, wrote in the document on the bottom corner that they interpreted this as a, quote, call for the physical elimination of JP2, of John Paul II. Physical elimination. I mean, they wouldn't do that, would they? They wouldn't do that. All right, May 13th, 1881. Precisely that happens. St. Peter's Square, big place, right? I'm metrically challenged. I immediately started thinking in terms of feet and football fields when you said that. But big place. It is the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. Our Lady of Fatima. There's a shooter, a Bulgarian Turk named Mehmet Ali Asha. He dropped off that morning around 9, 10 a.m. He and a group of Bulgarians that he's working with. The Bulgarians were totally controlled by the KGB, the Bulgarian secret police. Bulgaria was often called like the 16th Soviet Republic. Orel Chelik on the other side of the square, Asha is on the other. Mehmet Ali Asha is to be the primary shooter, waits there all day long. He wrote a note to himself, come wear Adidas tennis shoes so you could run away fast. Come wearing a cross disguised as a Christian. They wait all day. 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Go to the espresso bar, right? Go get another espresso. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. When is the Pope going to come out? When is he going to come out? Finally, he comes out in his open-air white Fiat Pope mobile. And as he drives around the ancient obelisk where Peter himself had been martyred about 1900 years, 2,000 years earlier, comes around, and around the corner, there's Asha waiting with his gun. He's got concealed in his jacket a 9mm semi-automatic Browning, right? 5:09 p.m., 5:10 p.m., 5:11, 5:12, 5:13, which matches the date on the calendar, right? 5/13/81. So 5:13 p.m. Rome time. Asha pulls out his gun, fires, boom, boom. Hits the Pope once in the hand and once in the abdomen. Just missed the main abdominal artery. If he had that dead on, he would have bled to death. He falls into the arms of Dziwisz, his personal aide, who's now a cardinal to this day in Poland. And Dziwisz said, "Are you hit?" He said, "Yes." "Where?" "In the stomach." They immediately rush him to Gemelli Hospital, which is where the Holy Father has been the past few weeks. And somehow, they happen to pass a doctor who convinces the police, Carbonari, right? Carbonier, convinces them that he's a doctor, jumped in the back of the ambulance. It was crucial that they did that. Elevated his legs, did whatever he could to stop the bleeding. They take him inside. They take him up to immediately Francesco Cruciti, the surgeon. They put the gloves on him. He goes in, looks at the patient, just sighs. The blood pressure is about 80/40. And he goes to get Dziwisz and says, "Father, I think you need to give him the last rites." So he gives him last rites. And right before John Paul II went out, he says to the nurse, "How could they do it? How could they do it?" Plural, which is a striking thing to say because it was just one shooter, probably about 15 to 20 feet from him. But he had a feeling who they were. He knew who they were. And he later finds out when he's recovering in Gemelli Clinic in June, in July, he starts thinking about 2/13 of May, our feast of Lady Fatima, our patron saint of Poland, right? Mother of Poland, May 13th, 1981, I'm shot. And he asks to read the third secret of Fatima. And he reads it in the Italian, in the Latin, in the Portuguese. And the third secret talks about the apparent shooting and killing of a pope. And he says, that was me. That was supposed to be me. He becomes convinced that, as he puts it, one hand shot the bullet, another deflected it or guided it. He and Ronald Reagan meet together at the Vatican 13 months later, June 7th, 1982. What had happened to Ronald Reagan on March 30th, 1981? He had been shot by which person? Who's the shooter? John Hinckley. Not part of any conspiracy, just trying to get the attention of an actress, Jodie Foster. So the two meet together at the Vatican, and they say to one another that they believe that God had spared their lives for a special purpose, which was to work together to defeat Soviet communism. And you have the President of the United States, not Polish, not Catholic, says to the Polish Catholic Pope, he says, "Hope remains in your country, in Poland. We working together can keep it alive." They're convinced that Poland can be the wedge, the crack in the communist bloc that could splinter the entire communist bloc from top to bottom. If they could keep the faith alive in Poland, solidarity alive in Poland, Lech Walesa alive in Poland, he's the only one of this whole group who's still alive to this day, Lech Walesa, that they could take down the whole Iron Curtain in Poland. 7 years after that meeting, June 1989, Poland finally had free and fair elections. The communists lost 100 out of 100 seats. This is why communists don't hold elections, by the way, all right? 100 out of 100 seats. Didn't win a single seat. Mikhail Gorbachev later said, when elections were held in Poland, I knew it was all over at that point. The Berlin Wall falls in November 1989, and eventually the Soviet Union itself disintegrates when Mikhail Gorbachev, on Christmas Day, 1991, a day the communists tried to ban, called George H.W. Bush, and said, I want to let you know I'm going to resign today. And when he resigned, he basically resigned the USSR. Cold War was over, peacefully over. Around the room, not to call anybody out on their age, but right, you remember, I mean, I was born in 1966. I was 13 years old at this time, 79, 1980. And we didn't think it was going to end in our lifetime, right? And everybody thought it was going to end really, really bad. Nuclear war, remember all the old Twilight Zone episodes? How many of the Twilight Zone episodes are about nuclear war, right? I mean, we thought this was going to end really bad. But it turned out beautifully, right? I mean, no missiles fired, no massive numbers of casualties, no Armageddon, no Third World War. It turned out beautifully. All right, that was point 3. Number 4, you guys keeping track here? All right, taking notes? All right, 4, and again, my list of 7 things about John Paul II that everybody should know. Pivotal writings. I have a bias toward these, but in my view, I think that these are a half dozen of his most crucial statements. Theology of the body. Theology of the body was done in a series of papal audiences, lectures, from 1979 to 1984. George Weigel, the papal biographer on John Paul II, later said that he still thinks that theology of the body is like this time bomb that's waiting to go off in the 21st century. It had really an enormous impact on the world. The teachings there are profound. He said, John Paul II, in the 1980 general audience, man, whom God created, male and female, so humanity, God created male and female, bears the divine image imprinted on his body from the very beginning. Man and woman constitute 2 different ways of the human being in a body, in the unity of that image. Cardinal Avery Dulles. By God's design, male and female are complementary. This complementarity comes to its fullest expression in the marital act. So John Paul II taught that God's theology plan for men and women is articulated in the very design, the biological design of men and women. So this has profound implications for gender, sexuality, marriage, parenthood, personhood, and for the family. And all the things that he did, this moral philosopher, wrote about, talked about phenomenology, all the things that he said going back many decades, I think that this could be, I think Weigel is right. This is something that still hasn't been fully appreciated yet, the writings on theology of the body. These other ones, these are 4 of my favorite encyclicals. Centesimus Annus, which came out in 1991. In fact, to connect that one with Evangelium Vitae, 1995, those are the 2. Evangelium Vitae means gospel of life, gospel of life. Those 2 are really where the term culture of life first come from. And Centesimus Annus, I think, is, for you students in particular, it is a brilliant exposition of, I think, exactly the proper understanding and balance between free markets, government, subsidiarity, socialism, communism. I mean, this gets it right. I think it's so well done. People ask me all the time, well, what do you believe in terms of like, read that. Read that encyclical. And he said there in 1991, the family is indeed sacred. Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, which was published in 1848, they write, quote, "Abolition of the family, exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists." And in the book, they just excoriate what they call the disgusting bourgeois claptrap about the sacred relation between the parent and the child. But we believe as Catholics is sacred. John Paul II wrote, "The family is indeed sacred. It is the place in which life, the gift of God, can be properly welcomed and protected against the many attacks to which it is exposed." I think about this all the time. I have 8 kids. No one will ever love you more than your parents, right? I mean, the best school teachers, right, can't love the kid like the parents do. I mean, no one is going to put up with what the kid puts them through like the parents, right? I mean, the parents love unconditionally, over and over. It's really clearly we were created to be raised in families. John Paul II said it's the first home, it's the first place of education, right? It's the first school, it's the place of the first catechism, and can develop in accordance with what constitutes authentic human growth. In the face of the so-called culture of death, he wrote, "The family is the heart of the culture of life." So that's in Centesimus Annus. It is in Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. I read Veritatis Splendor, which means what? Splendor of truth, all right? Evangelium Vitae, Gospel of Life. Fides et Ratio, faith and reason. So that came out in 1998. I read these 3 when I was an evangelical Protestant in the 1990s, and I thought, man, there ain't nothing like this in the evangelical Christian bookstores that I go to. I mean, this is really, really good. I mean, nothing against some of the other stuff, but this is life-changing. This is really profound. Now, I know these folks in the Catholic Church claim that they have this magisterium, this deposit of faith, and the Holy Spirit speaks through this magisterium and leads them to these papal encyclicals. I have heard that, but now that I'm reading this, I don't know. Maybe they're on something here. It's really 3 profound documents, and they all led to, I think, really one of his greatest contributions, even more than the encyclicals, but it also builds off the encyclicals, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The reissue of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So going back to 1566, following the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, which was that was in response to Luther and Protestant Reformation. So the Church published the Roman Catechism, 1566. That was what was used for the next 400 plus years. 450 years. You would get different kind of adaptations that were done by different countries. So we in America use the what? The Baltimore Catechism. So that was used late 1800s into the late 1960s. So John Paul II, I'll tell you, this Polish Pope had incredible energy, did he not? To do all these things that he's going to do from 1978 to 2005. He tasked a group of 12 bishops with creating a new catechism. The project was spearheaded by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who would be his successor, Benedict XVI. Also leading it, so Ratzinger was Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. By the way, he's the guy that would give theological commentary statement on the third secret of Fatima on May 13, 2000, who said quite interestingly, "I know in the original Fatima vision, the Pope, the bishop in white," who's the only bishop that wears white? Bishop of Rome, the Pope, appears to die. But this doesn't mean that things are set in stone, right? Things can be changed by making reparation, like the children of Fatima said, by people praying, people doing the rosary. There was Father later Cardinal Christopher Schönborn, who became Archbishop of Vienna. So promulgated the text in 1892, October 11th, 1992, which through the Apostolic Constitution Fide, the deposit of faith. It was presented at a special Vatican ceremony, December 7th, 1992. First published in French in 1992, then in English in 1994, and then finally in Latin in 1997. And I remember after reading these documents, Veritatis Splendor, Splendor of Truth, Evangelium Vitae Fides et Ratio, when I got a hold of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, I was just floored. And I know other Protestants who've read it, they're like, okay, there's nothing like this. This thick book that quotes everything from Scripture and the apostles and the disciples to Augustine and Clement and Cyril of Alexandria and Aquinas and Bonaventure and on and on and on, just kind of seamlessly. It's profound. You read that and you think to yourself, oh, they're right. This is real, right? This is, they're on it. They're right. Okay, so those are some statements. How am I doing on time, Ray? Am I all right? I have until 8:15. I don't know what that means. He's just nodding his head. All right, I'll go a little faster. Religious liberty and freedom properly understood here at Thomas More University, Institute on Religion and Liberty. All right. I think this is something as Americans we really need to know. And he understood this. John Paul II understood this. He said in Veritatis Splendor, the relationship between man's freedom and God's law is most deeply lived out in the heart of the person, in his moral conscience. And he challenged those in the West, especially America, country like ours, to avoid cultural tendency in which freedom is exalted almost to the point of idolatry. It's like and Francis has said this as well. It's almost like we engage in an idolatry of freedom, where our highest value is freedom, 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 freedom for its own sake. But all of these guys argued you shouldn't have the freedom to do what's bad, what's wrong. They said the West suffers from what John Paul II and Benedict XVI called confused ideology of freedom. We have freedom wrong. It's not the correct. Freedom doesn't mean to the Catholic, to the Christian, the right to do, part of my language, right? But whatever the hell you want, right? And hell there is a specific word, right? I mean, you don't do whatever you want. That's an abuse of freedom. That's an abuse of how you should believe it. John Paul II spoke on the 200th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution in 1987 in Miami, Florida, with Ronald Reagan on the side. That book, A Pope and a President, Reagan and John Paul II on the front, people ask me, is that a real photo? Yeah, they're together in Miami, Florida, September 10th, 1987. And he said, it's time to recognize that meaning of your document, the U.S. Constitution, and to reflect on what it means. It is time to recall the original political faith with its appeal to the sovereignty of God. Freedom is a great blessing. It is a blessing of God. Freedom channeled the fullness of human life in America. It was this freedom that America is called to live and guard and transmit. He called it ordered freedom or ordered liberty. You don't want to have a disordered freedom or a disordered liberty, right? You have to have a properly ordered freedom or ordered liberty. Thomas Merton said this as well. Russell Kirk said this as well. There's my favorite quote. I want to put this into a bumper sticker from a car. It's probably not going to fit. Or it's a t-shirt, all right? I want to make t-shirts that say this. The only true freedom, the only freedom that can truly satisfy is the freedom to do what we ought as human beings created by God according to his plan. Think about that. Is that not right on? That's the only true freedom, the only freedom that can truly satisfy. Do what you ought to do according to God and God's plan and God's purposes. When your freedom is a freedom to do whatever you want, irrespective of God's plan, even against God's plan, that's not real freedom. Justice Anthony Kennedy and Planned Parenthood V. Casey decision. At the heart of liberty is the right to come up with your own definition, your own meaning of meaning, your own definition of liberty, your own definition of freedom. No, it is not. It certainly wasn't the founder's conception at the Catholic Church and the Catechism's conception. It wasn't John Paul II's conception. All right, I got a couple more. This is number 6, if you're keeping track. And you are, right? Keeping track. Got it? Number 6. Faustina Kowalska, 1905 to 1938, Born Helena Faustina Kowalska, the third of 10 children to Stanislaw and Mariana, August 25th, 1905, humble village in Poland. She's 19 years old, 1924. She's at a dance in a park. She's there with her sister. It's like the Roaring Twenties, even in Poland at that point. Lenin's gone, right? Survived the battle at the Vistula. They're dancing in the park, having a good time. She feels this call to be a nun. Her parents have said no, so she's put it off. So picture this. She's there at this dance, and all of a sudden, everything freezes. And in the middle of all this, she stops in her tracks, right? Looks straight ahead. And they're appearing only to her. In the middle of the dance floor is Jesus crucified, bleeding, right? Naked in front of her. And everybody else is probably looking, why is my sister just standing there? Frozen at that moment. And he says to her, how long shall I put up with you? How long are you going to keep putting me off? How long are you going to keep putting me off? Well, she comes to senses at that point, and that's obviously a life-changing moment. She dashes to the nearest church, not just any church, but the church of St. Stanislaw Kostka, one of the patron saints of Poland. Just a few people in the church, but like at the dance hall, she suddenly finds herself alone with Jesus. She prostrates herself before the tabernacle, and she suddenly hears the words of Jesus, "Go at once to Warsaw. You will enter a convent there." She goes back to her uncle's home where she's staying with her sister and packs up her bags. He says, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm going to a convent." He says, "You can't do that. It'll break your parents' hearts. You can't do that. I have to go. I have to go." She's like, "I just saw Jesus twice, man, on the dance floor. I'm going. I'm going. Your parents are going to be really upset. I got to go. I got to go." No texting in those days, no fax machine, no phone, right? But she goes. There she's turned by a number of different groups, but the Congregation of Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy on Zitnia Street in Warsaw, they let her in. She takes the name Maria. She has all sorts of visions, appearances of the Blessed Mother, Jesus. And then on February 22nd, 1931, she has what image? That one. That one. As she described it, in her cell at the convent, Jesus blessing the world with the left hand against a garment at his right breast. From the opening in the garment, exuding from Jesus' sacred heart, two large rays, one red and the other white, representing blood and water to heal the world of our sins, right? Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, an atonement for our sins and those of the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. The Divine Mercy Chaplet, we have that. In silence, I gazed intently at the Lord, said Faustina. You know, why is it the most amazing things that happen in all of history happen alone in a convent with a little Polish nun, right? No one else sees anything like this. My soul was overwhelmed with fear, but also with joy. The Christ figure instructed her, mankind will not enjoy peace until it turns with confidence to my mercy. Jesus asked Faustina to paint this image of her. She said, "Wait, I don't paint," right? I think about that. If I was asked to paint it, it'd look like a stick figure. I mean, it would be. And then inscribe the words underneath what? Jesus, I trust in you. He told her, I desire that this image be venerated, first in your chapel and then throughout the world. Are you guys doing that? Right? He promised her that the soul that venerates this image will not perish. I also promise victory over its enemies already here on earth. She died in 1938, October 1938. 11 months later, Hitler-Stalin passed. The Nazis would invade Poland September 1st, 1939 from the west. The Bolsheviks, Stalin, would invade from the east 2.5 weeks later, and World War II was on. What would they need? An ocean of mercy. The very ocean of mercy that she said that the world would need. Jesus told her, the work of your mercy must spread throughout the world, and a feast of divine mercy must be solemnly promulgated and celebrated. Jesus also told her in May 1935, quote, you will prepare the world for my final coming. Her diary remained repressed for a while. It looks like it's dead. Nothing's ever going to happen with it. And guess what the Vatican did? Conclave of the College of Cardinals in October 1978. They pick a Pole as Pope. And he reads this, and he's blown away by it. He says, I think this is real. Jesus told her, this is in her diary, I bear a special love for Poland, and if she will be obedient to my will, I shall exalt her in might and holiness. From Poland will come the spark that will prepare the world for my final coming. What's the spark? I don't know. By the way, some think that it's John Paul II who helped prepare the world for this by canonizing who is his first saint of the new millennium? Faustina Kowalska. She's the first canonized saint of the new millennium, April 2000. He told her, August 1934, write this, before I come as the just judge, I'm coming as the King of mercy. Before the day of justice arrives, there will be given to people a sign in the heavens of this sort. By the way, for my Protestant friends, read Revelation on this. All light in the heavens will be extinguished. There will be great darkness over the whole earth. Then the sign of the cross will be seen in the sky. And from the openings where the hands and feet of the Savior were nailed will come forth great lights, which will light up the earth for a period of time. This will come shortly before the last day. March 25th, 1936, the Blessed Mother tells Faustina, you have to speak to the world about Jesus' great mercy, and prepare the world for the second coming of him who will come not as a merciful Savior, but as a just judge. How terrible will that day be? Determined is the day of justice. Jesus told her December 1936, speak to the world about my mercy. Let all mankind recognize my unfathomable mercy. It is a sign for the end times. February 17th, 1937, Secretary of my mercy, that's what he called her. Write, tell souls about this great mercy of mine, because the awful day, the day of justice, is near. June 1937, I am prolonging the day, time of my mercy for the sake of sinners. Woe to them if they do not recognize this time. And then I'll read one final passage. February 1938, Jesus told her, in the old covenant, I sent prophets wield thunderbolts to my people. Today I'm sending you with my mercy to the people of the whole world. I do not want to punish aching mankind. I desire to heal it, pressing it to my merciful heart. But for the day of justice, I am sending the day of mercy. By the way, Pope Francis declared a few years ago the year of mercy, the doors of mercy. So, are we in those times? I don't know. All right. That's above pay grade. But that's what she said. All right, let me wrap up here. Seventh and final. His death, he died April 2nd, 2005. And I'll just spend a couple minutes on this. He suffered, right? Most people in this room remember this. It was 20 years ago, right? That's why we're doing this now, 20 years later. He had Parkinson's, this man who was just in amazing physical shape throughout his life. Parkinson's is so debilitating. Face is frozen, body's frozen. He's trying to speak, trying to articulate words, right? He can't do it. People were calling on him to resign, which hadn't been done in centuries. It's clear that Benedict XVI resigned, right? That was really a shock when that happened at all. But he wouldn't do it, and he wanted to keep hanging on to show people that, yes, even people with Parkinson's, right? They have value, they have worth, they have dignity. He can still do his job. And you all remember Terry Schiavo? They turned off the feeding apparatus to her by judge's order, even though the family wanted to keep her alive, right? He provided an example of staying alive. He died. Everybody at the time was thinking, wow, when's he going to go? You know, I hope it's May 13th, like the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. That's when he was shot, May 13th, 1981. When's he going to go? It should be a 13th, right? All the numbers 13. Well, it turns out that April 2nd, 2005, which Cardinal Bertone pointed this out. He said, actually, if you add up 4/2/2005, it adds up to 13. And he said, and by the way, he died at 21:37 on the clock, Rome time, which adds up to 13. And Bertone has a whole chapter in his Fatima on all the 13ths in John Paul II. But died at 21:37. When did he die? On the feast, the vigil of the feast day of Divine Mercy, created by him canonizing St. Faustina Kowalska. That's perfect. They were celebrating the feast of Divine Mercy, giving him the Eucharist when he died in his room at that time. Age 83. All right, I guess I have to stop. I will just show this, okay? Honorable mentions. I'm only supposed to do 7. World traveler. Traveled to more countries. He was the most traveled individual ever. First pope to leave Italy, come to America, was Pope Paul VI. Was the first. He comes to America a bunch of times, visits over 100 countries. He became the most photographed figure in history. He's Pope from 1980 to 2005, 27 years. Third longest papacy ever. What are the 2 longest? Yeah, exactly. Well, Leo XIII, 25 years, 1878 1903. Pius IX, 1846 to 1878. And Peter, longest serving. Saint maker. He canonized almost 500 saints, which was more than the previous popes going back 500 years. He beatified over 1,300 people. They called him like the saint factory, right? But this is a guy who went out of Italy. Maximilian Kolbe, he's the guy that canonized Padre Pio, actually, speaking of Italy. The new evangelization, last one. My friend Pat Novoski, in his book, 100 Ways that John Paul II Changed the World, he lists 100 from 100 to 1. Guess what's number 1? The new evangelization. And Patrick is on to something there, because what we're doing here right now, what Thomas More University is doing, what the Institute of Religion and Liberty is doing, what Andrew is doing, what everybody here is doing. I mean, this here, right now, this is the new evangelization. And he taught us to do this. Go out. The laity can do things. I'm not a priest. I'm not a cardinal. I'm not a bishop, right? The laity can do this as well. It's part of the new evangelization. All right, I'll stop there, and I guess we're going to take questions, have a discussion if I didn't put you guys to sleep.
Or we take a break or anything,
Yeah,
Ray?
whatever you want to
Just
do.
going right into...
I have a mic right here. Or
Okay, there are microphones the students have, so raise your hand, and they'll bring it to you.
John, you got a question?
Yeah, loud enough. I'll just curious to get your thoughts. You know, a lot of people kind of have difficulty, squaring, freedom is essentially like the ability to do good.
right.
With like different ideas of religious freedom. Now, any religion that's not Catholic, is, there's a consequence of what we believe and say it's false. So what is religious freedom in that sense of freedom and the ability to use good?
Well, and splendor of truth is a big part of this, right? So veritas splendor. And so is Fides Oratio. So Fides Oratio, he talks about faith and reason working together as the 2 wings, right? The 2 wings of faith and reason to which human beings ascend to the truth. If you have only one wing, if you have just faith or just reason, right, you can't soar to the higher heights, to truth, to capital T, truth itself. And it's a lot like faith and freedom, right? Faith and freedom need each other. If you have just freedom, without the moral rudder of faith to navigate the freedom. And Ronald Reagan talked about the twin beacons of faith and freedom that brighten the American sky. So if you take away one of those twin beacons, if you take away the light of faith and you just have freedom, it's going to be darker. It's going to be murkier. You need a light of faith in order to help illuminate freedom and navigate it and the culture in the proper direction. So that's what they're calling on not just Catholics, but all Christians and all human beings, period, to do. So even if, and they would say, through a properly formed conscience, through conscience, and also, I didn't talk about natural law. I thought about making natural law one of these, but Peter Crave says natural law means that in a way we ought to do what we are, right? Based on what we are. Yeah, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Oh.
No, okay. It looked like you were willing to, like you were ready to chime in.
The old philosophy professor in me was getting stirred up.
Yeah. But it was, yeah, so that's what's meant by a proper ordering of freedom in relation to truth. And so we do believe as Catholics is through the deposit of faith, we have the fullness of truth. And I know that alienates a lot of people. When I was an evangelical Protestant, I could still believe in God, I could still be saved, but I did come to the conclusion that I'm lacking the fullness of faith that you can get through the Catholic Church, through the 7 sacraments, through a lot of other stuff, including even like the saints. I was talking earlier, I'd done a book on stigmatists. When I spend a day writing about Marx and the devil, oh man, it's like, oh, this is awful. So like spiritual cleansing at night, I take out a book about a saint and read it. And it uplifts me, it edifies me. Now, if I'm just doing nothing but reading the Bible all the time, well, the Bible's great. Of course, the Word of God, but I could read it for the 1,000th time. I can still get things out of it. I read it every day, but it can be really inspiring to read a book from Catherine of Siena or Gemma Galgani or Mother Teresa. And we've got thousands of saints, especially thanks to this guy that we can read about.
Dr. Noel.
What do you know about Jordan Peterson? He calls our idea of liberty chaos, I think.
Did a podcast with Jordan Peterson last summer, and I'd only watched the show a couple of times at that point. They contacted me on a Sunday and asked me to come on the show, and they wanted me on the next day, Monday. I couldn't do it. I was doing a bunch of PragerU videos, which just came out this last week, by the way. Check it out. It's called the Hall of Evil series, PragerU. I talk about Lenin, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, and Castro. But so I ended up doing the interview with Jordan Peterson, who was fascinated by the devil and Karl Marx, and especially the fact that Marx's favorite line. You all have a favorite quote? Mine might be not afraid. Maybe that quote that I put up on there. Marx's favorite quote, he said, yes, from Goethe's Faust, the Mephistopheles character. Everything that exists deserves to perish. That was Marx's favorite quote. Now you know why at the end of the day I need to read something uplifting and edifying. But Peterson read that and he's like, man, that's crazy. And he knows all about Faust. He knows all about Goethe. He's read it a number of times. So that hooked him, and he asked me to come do an interview. We spent about two or 3 hours. He interviewed me at the Museum of the Bible, on the stage of the Museum of the Bible in D.C. I'll tell you, that's a guy who knows a lot about the Bible and a lot about religion. And his wife is now Catholic. And I think his current tour is called Wrestling with God. I'm convinced that he's not wrestling much anymore. I mean, he's got to be a Christian at least. Whether or not he'll be Catholic is another thing, but I think he's definitely Christian.
He's the only guy that my children agree with.
Right. Well, that's a good bridge, right? Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson is especially very influential among young men. So I think he's doing a good thing for those guys. Telling them to be men, telling them not to dress like sloths, telling them, to just be more proper, do things that, just to be men. Yeah.
Okay, Dave.
Yes, hello, sir. I have a question here. What would you consider John Paul II's most visible mission of the church to the world?
Visible mission?
Yes, like when I was reading or saying the rosary, I say with the descent of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit in the form of tongues of fire settled over the heads of each apostle. That wind and fire, symbolizing grace and holiness, initiated the visible mission of the church. Jesus has promised to send the Holy Spirit who would teach, comfort, and assist them.
Yeah.
So what was his greatest accomplishment for the world?
Yeah. And I definitely can't give one answer. In fact, when I was going through Patrick Novikowski's list, I thought, what's he going to pick for number one, right? Because it could be, I mean, some people in the more political theological pick the fall of communism, but that's great. It's an epic achievement. But the things that he did spiritually for the church and with saints, and I think it's clever that Patrick picked the new evangelization. And it's a cop-out, Patrick. I mean, come on. But that's a good choice. I don't think I could pick just one. Interestingly, I mean, that's one of them. A lot of times it's easy for me to, like, people ask me what my favorite movie is. I'll say, well, I can't be a number, but I could pick the top 5. Yeah. Maybe Theology of the Body. Because that time bomb that should have exploded in the 21st century, explaining genders, complementarity, family, marriage, that was really influential and kind of almost foresaw where we are now, is not being tapped right now and should be. I think because people are afraid, and they should be not afraid.
Well, my last name is Kobza, spelled K-O-B-Z-A. I herald from Ukraine via Poland to the United States.
Yeah.
Okay? And I see the world in peril right now.
Oh, yeah, it's a disaster. Well, why do you think I read that end time stuff? Right.
And I'm gone. Thank you.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's okay. Yeah. No, it's I think you're right. Yeah. No, it's okay. No, we're in big trouble. These are dark times. And I mean, we don't know when the times will be, when the final times will be, but yeah.
Is there anyone else with a question or comment?
By the way, so the gentleman just mentioned the rosary. One of the things, too, was a creation on Thursday of the Luminous Mysteries. That was the doing of John Paul II. Yeah.
I was wondering, where would you put World Youth Day on the list, and what kind of impact do you feel that had on
Yeah. World Youth Day was big, too, although it seemed to be a lot more influential 20 years ago. I think of World Youth Day in 1993 than I think it is currently. But that guy's right. I mean, the state of the church is, it's not great right now. It's true. But World Youth Day was also sitting up. It's on Patrick's list of the top 100.
I think there's some questions up on the top row.
Oh, wow. Look at that. The peanut gallery. Yeah.
Apart from the list that you gave, do you have any other recommendations for readings from John Paul II, like Rosarum Virginius Mariae or anything like that?
Yeah, wow. A really good short biography is Peggy Noonan's John Paul the Great. That's one of my favorite books. That's really quite good. I should think of a better list, though, of things to recommend. But those encyclicals I would recommend. They're not that long. Catechism, of course, anytime. Another John Paul II book. Peggy Noonan's is really good. And it's short, easy to read. My book, The Divine Plan. There you go. So no one said it. There you go. Other questions? Yeah.
My name's Genevieve. Do you have a suggestion for college students? Because I've found a very hard time reading the theology of the body. Any advice on how to dive into this?
Okay, thank you. Theology of the Body. If you get a big book, edited volume by the professor at Ave Maria, it's really hard to read. It's really hard to read. In fact, not to be disrespectful, I just got done praising it. But you read some of those and you think, this must have put the audience to sleep. They must have thought, where's this guy going with this stuff? It's deep philosophy. But the best book on theology of the body and the best work on it is by Chris West. Yeah. Read Christopher West's books on theology of the body. That's done really well. He does a great job of picking those up, kind of interpreting. It's a lot like, I know it's almost sacrilegious to criticize Chesterton, but I think a much better way to read Chesterton is by Dale Ahlquist's book, The Apostle of Common Sense. That's like a really good distillation of the best of Chesterton. And I think West does that as well with Theology of the Body. I would recommend reading that rather than reading the big, thick volume itself of Theology of the Body.
Any more? Yes, sir.
If the Catholic Church and the world had John Paul as Pope right now, do you think it would make a difference, and what would the difference be?
Yeah. Oh, man. I don't want to say anything too critical, right? I mean, we'll try to end on a positive note. But, yeah, and one thing that was clear when he was Pope, there wasn't much confusion, right? Like a lot of times right now, there's a lot of debate over different statements by Pope Francis. And a lot of the people will say, well, he's being misinterpreted. That's mistranslated. And then it's just a lot of what's coming out of there it's confusing. So I think the current papacy lacks the clarity that you had under John Paul II for 27 years. And and confusion hurts the cause. It hurts the faith. And actually, I know several people who have come into the church because of that. I know a lot of people who came in, convert maker, boy, he really made a lot of converts, including me. I'm from Grove City College. Our most famous graduate is Scott Hahn. Scott Hahn came into the church through John Paul II. That was a time of just gigantic numbers of converts, of ex-Protestants, of good Protestants who knew their stuff coming into the Catholic Church. That's not happening now. The numbers just keep going down. I don't know if you saw the latest Gallup numbers, the latest Pew study numbers. It's really going down. We're losing a lot of people in the church. And I think the lack of clarity and the confusion is a big part of that.
Down here in front.
Thank you. Did Pope John Paul II write at all about how to handle like the digital age as it was coming up during his papacy, especially with his writings on like the human person?
Yeah, and that's part of evangelization, taking advantage of the new medium. And you suddenly saw this flurry. And I think that's why Patrick Novakoski is onto something, listening to that first. You had just so many people who went into talk radio, EWTN, New Evangelization, Mother Angelica. I mean, she really did it. All of a sudden, all these Catholic publishing houses that came up that were run by lay people, TV, podcasts. I mean, I think of the book that I did on stigmas, I've probably done 100 podcasts. I mean, everybody from Matt Brad with Aquinas, the most recent one I was the hippie Catholic with Amber Rose, and she sent me the over the weekend the podcast we did. I looked up. She's like 56,000 followers, man. It's amazing. The people that, so that's all new evangelization, and those are a lot of the people that are spreading the gospel and spreading the word and making converts more than anything else. People like Scott Hahn, Scott Hahn's books. Scott's not a priest. He's not a cardinal. He's not a bishop. Read a book of his like Rome Sweet Home, Hail Holy Queen, the book on the Eucharist, the Lamb's Supper, fantastic. It's one of the best examples of making the case for the Eucharist that anybody's ever written in a single small book. But digital age would be podcasts and new media, radio, TV. Yeah, he was on that. Remember, he comes out of, he was an actor. He and Ronald Reagan were both actors. He was a playwright. And he wanted to be an actor. I mean, that was, and in fact, Bishop Robert Barron, who's in our Divine Plan movie documentary on Reagan and John Paul II, says, you know, the Vatican, if you go to St. Peter's Basilica, it's a stage. It's an altar. I mean, it's an altar. It's also a stage. And he said John Paul II just knew, almost in like an actor's way, how to take on that space, what to do, how to hold himself, how to stand. And, you know, those are all things that he learned, not from being a priest, right, but from being an actor. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. Or you spoke about this earlier, just a comment. So I've heard St. Faustina and Maximilian Kolbe and John Paul II are that spark. May have been Benedict that wrote about that. It was on a Zine article years ago. I'd want to find it again, but that's just food for thought. And then the other thing about Theology of the Body, for anyone interested in digging into that, I used to hand out copies of Theology of the Body for beginners.
Oh, yes.
Which is a really good entry. It's very down to earth would really reach college students.
Theology of the body for beginners.
And speak to the experiential aspect of what they're facing in the culture, to know the meaning of their body and relationships. So.
See, that's a great example. You can probably Google, beware, right? But you could follow probably some reliably good Catholic podcasts on theology of the body that in an hour and a half you could take more from than trying to read that big, thick book, right? No disrespect intended, but it's true. Do a better job explaining it, conveying it.
Read The Sadness of Christ by Thomas More.
Okay, all right. There you go. A plug Thomas More, of course.
Okay, we have more questions upstairs.
Hello, Doctor. I was wondering, do you think that John Paul got any inspiration for like his theology of the body writings from Humanae Vitae, that encyclical?
Yeah, no question. In fact, I would call Evangelium Vitae like a sequel to Humanae Vitae, and a lot of it are references back to that. So from 1968 to 1995. It's a continuation of it and even applying it to modern times. Because by the time the 1990s comes on, dealing with genetic engineering, in vitro fertilization, and in 1968 the big issue was population explosion, the pill, birth control. And so at that point, by 1995, you're on to other new technologies, cloning, embryonic stem cell research, and he also deals with capital punishment beautifully in that. I'll never forget riding back across I-80 into Pennsylvania, my home state, going across Ohio, the Meander Reservoir, and my wife was reading to me from Evangelium Vitae on capital punishment. And I said, wow, that's it. That's it. This guy's got it. And again, I wasn't Catholic at that point. But I thought, that's what I believe, or no, that's what I want to believe, right? Always trying to explain to people my position on abortion versus capital punishment, don't really want to execute. And he just explains it all so beautifully in there, which makes you think, not that, wow, he's right because he agrees with me, but the way he says it, that's, you can just tell the truth when you're reading it, right? You can also kind of tell nonsense, or it's like, that kind of sounds right, but it's just not. There's something there. I can't quite explain, but also with truth, the splendor of truth, he nails it in that document.
I think we have one more question.
Yes, quick question relative to religious liberty and current events. So, the Institute for Religious Liberty today, the Wisconsin Supreme Court decision relative to Catholic charities and religious liberty. Pope John Paul II obviously may not have considered himself a politician, but understood how to work with politicians. And so, reading what happened today and the potential implications, negatively or positively, for religious liberty and Catholic charities in particular, would Pope John Paul II have viewed today as a win or as a loss in defense of religious liberty in the grand scheme?
Yeah, he'd be appalled by so much that's gone on since his death. He'd be really shocked. One of the first things that he did, one of the last things he was able to do before Parkinson's really took him, he was in the battle over the European Union's constitution. And so he died April 2nd, 2005. This raged 2003, 2004, early 2000s, but it was a battle over whether or not to acknowledge God in the EU constitution. And you had France, no, don't acknowledge God, definitely not. You had the other secular countries saying no. You had all the countries from behind the former Iron Curtain all wanted yes. All the former communist countries were like, yeah, you got to say that's where rights really come from, like the American Declaration. And John Paul II led the push on that. George Weigel's book, The Cube in the Cathedral, focuses at length on that. But he pushed for the idea always that, as is understood in the Declaration of Independence, you need to understand that your rights come from God. Right? We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There was somebody last year who caused a big firestorm on Twitter and social media. She's a journalist because she said, these Christian nationalists, right, whatever that means, they think their rights come from God rather than the government, right? It's like, well, that's what the Declaration says, right? They come from God. That's what we believe. So he was a staunch defender of that. And Yeah, he'd be appalled at so many things going on right now. Did you see, I wrote my latest column on this for the Pittsburgh paper. The ACLU of Massachusetts, the town of Quincy, Massachusetts, the mayor and the city council voted to put outside of their city-county building 2 statues of the patron saints of firemen and police officers, Saints Florian and Michael the Archangel. And the ACLU of Massachusetts is stopping it, filed a lawsuit, because they said that Michael the Archangel stepping on the neck of the serpent is reminiscent of the police officer who stepped on the neck of George Floyd, right? And so they're trying to stop it. And meanwhile, it's like, don't you people know anything about religion? All of our statues of Michael the Archangel, he's stepping on the head. By the way, we've got a bunch of statues of Mary stepping on the head of the serpent, right? Which just shows the religious ignorance that we're dealing with today with people.
Well,
I don't know if I answered your question.
That happened in the Olympics, too. Remember
Right.
the Olympics in France, the opening ceremony?
Yeah, and the religious ignorance then looks like a religious hostility.
Right.
Which often is. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I would just like to say that
Yes,
the
ma'am, sorry.
International Day for Firefighters is the feast of St. Florian.
Oh, nice.
And
nice.
the emblem that you see is kind of a curved, 4-piece cross.
Yeah.
That is the emblem of Florian.
Nice.
And so, I think it's kind of interesting because Europe, that's a very important saint in Europe.
Right.
But,
No, very good. My hometown is Butler, Pennsylvania. Is that not crazy? I used to tell people that, and they're like, I didn't even think about it. But now it's famous or infamous. But President Trump tweeted out on the day of the feast day of Michael the Archangel, which I know very well because it's my son's birthday, my son John's birthday. He put on all of his platforms, he put the quote of Michael the Archangel. And Robert Reich, the former Clinton labor official, said, "This is frightening stuff. Trump is talking about his opponents being cast in hell," right? Like, no, it's the prayer of Michael the Archangel. Defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil, cast into hell. Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. By the way, Reich, if that offends you, what are you saying, dude, right? Right? No, he's not talking about casting Kamala Harris into hell. He's talking about casting the demons into hell. But again, it just shows the ignorance of people that we're dealing with today. They know nothing about religion. And there's a kind of arrogant ignorance about it as well. Over here.
Church leaders, historians, talking heads could talk all day about what Pope John Paul II's greatest contribution was. But if you were just to have him on stage talking like grandma, all of us, what he would say gave the greatest joy in doing while he was public.
Wow, what gave him the greatest joy? It's a good question. He loved World Youth Day, for sure. Definitely. Always loved being with young people. That goes back to his time in Poland when he did a lot of, pre-marriage training with young people, right? Would go on hikes, and that gave him a lot of joy. And I've talked to a lot of people who knew him and said that he was really a happy guy and kind of like just almost like a blue-collar guy, which he was a moral philosopher. I talked to Jerry Olszewski, who was a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers and my alma mater, University of Pittsburgh, and he said that he was with a bunch of Polish pilgrims, and he saw John Paul II come up to this group of Polish pilgrims, and he said, "Hey, where are you all from?" And they're like, "Ah!" And he's trying to talk to them. "You're from where?" "Oh, yeah, I went there." "Ah!" They're just kind of feigning, and Jerry, you can tell he just want to talk to them. And I had a priest tell me one time, he came up to a couple of us at the Vatican and was joking like, "Hey, why don't you get a real job rather than being a priest? You don't want to work for a living, huh?" But he liked to joke and in just kind of a normal, guy manner.
My favorite memory of him is Jean Gallo. This is when Edward Schillebeeckx, the Dutch theologian, was being questioned in the Vatican. And they wanted someone who spoke Dutch to be part of the tribunal. We had a professor at the Greg, a Jesuit named Jean Gallo, who was Belgian. He spoke Dutch or Flemish and French, and he spoke all kinds of languages. So they sent Gallo over to be part of the tribunal. But Gallo had this thing about clerical wear. He refused to wear the collar. Gallo said, he's a very conservative theologian, which led a lot of people to be surprised at this. But Gallo said, Jesus looked like every other man. And I think I have an obligation to look like every other man. He always wore a suit and tie, but he would not wear a collar. So right after we had Jean Gallo, we had René Latourelle, French-Canadian, who came in and told us, never leave the house without your Roman collar on. So these two were going back and forth. So the Pope John Paul II visited the Gregorian University one day. And the seminary I was at still had the traditional soutanes. And so we were asked to wear our soutanes to be the honor guard for the Pope. So we're all standing there. The Pope is leaving the Gregorian University, going down into the Piazza della Pilota. A huge Vatican car pulled up. We always called him La Maria Nera, the Black Maria. That's what everybody calls him. And John Paul II is just ready to get into it. Another Black Maria pulls up, and Gallo gets out. He's coming from the Vatican. John Paul II is going back to the Vatican. And John Paul II stopped. And he looked at him like, he said, what's that you got on around here? And Gallo just went, and the Pope went,
yeah, nice.
And then they waved to each other, big smile, climbed and went away. And I thought, that's a great guy.
Yeah. Just a normal guy, a good guy.
He let Gallo know what he was thinking, and he didn't get angry. It was just, he was fun.
Yeah, Nancy Reagan told me, so after Reagan died, she was going through pictures of Ronnie with different leaders. This is a few years, so she doesn't get as choked up as she used to. And she's going through pictures with Joanne Drake, her chief assistant. They're like, and here's Ronnie and Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, I remember Margaret. Here's Ronnie and Mikhail Gorbachev. And then they flip, and she goes, and what is it? And it was a picture of him and John Paul II. And she said, he was my favorite. And Joanne said, why? She said, he just reminded me so much of Ronnie. He was just a normal, nice guy, would ask you about your parents. If you were a stranger, what did your dad do? What did your mother do? And he was just so nice and normal. And yeah, he had that effect on people.
There is in Rome, by the way, a young people's coffee bar called GP Due. GP Giovanni Paolo Due. If you're on the Via del Corso, it's on San Carlo, the Church of San Carlo, down underneath. It is called GP Due, and young people go there all the time to talk about faith. They do Bible studies. It's a wonderful thing. It was made in his memory.
Yeah. That's a fitting tribute.
Yeah.
He would love that, actually. That's a good answer to your question right there. Yeah.
Okay.
Raymond, you give me the hook?
Yeah, Bill, are you finished?
I am.
All right, thank you, Senior Clee. Everybody, great, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
I just wanted to finish with 2 dates for your calendars. First, if you look at the chairs, we have one more event in the Pope John Paul II Memorial Semester. There is an event on a dialogue on ecumenism. One of the areas that Pope John Paul II is so well known that we particularly strongly endorse is the work that he's done with ecumenism, and that dialogue is very much inspired by his work. So if you'll take a look at this, you'll notice Thursday, April 24th, 7 p.m. I think you'll find that it's an exciting program. Look forward to having you here with us, which will be co-sponsored by the IRL, but primarily sponsored by the Center for Faith, Mission, and Catholic Education. Hannah, did you want to add anything to that?
Secondly, October 15th, we have now decided that that will be the event where we begin the 10th anniversary of the Institute for Religious Liberty. So we'll be celebrating 2025, 2026 as our 10th anniversary year. And the first of those events will be on October 15th. So please put that date calendar. What we hope to do, and again, I'd be anxious to hear some thoughts of yours if you have any. We want to bring back the first speaker looking at religious liberty 10 years later. His name was Rabbi David Saperstein. At the time, he was the ambassador for international religious liberty in Washington, D.C., out of the State Department. And he was one of the two speakers with Archbishop Kurtz of Louisville. So we'll be talking to both of them, but Saperstein has already accepted. So we'll be thinking about how we can look at what that 10 years has brought in the area of religious liberty. And certainly some of that has been inspired by Pope John Paul II. Thank you for being here, as always, and thank you for your support of the Institute for Religious Liberty.